If you've been on the internet long enough, I'd say there's a pretty good chance you've seen a chart that looks like this. Probably way more cursed. That's an alignment chart. You know, that thing you use to determine your alignment. It's that thing you put at the top right of your character sheet. Yeah, right up there. But to define it for those who don't know, as it says on D&D Beyond, alignment is a combination of two factors. One identifies morality, good, evil, or neutral, and the other describes attitudes towards society and order, lawful, chaotic, or neutral. Thus, 9 distinct alignments define the possible combinations, which are a lot of options, and all of them can be interpreted differently, so... Okay, this is a disclaimer that this video is my opinion. These alignments do have specific definitions on how they work. It's in the handbook. So yes, it technically isn't up for interpretation, but that's not what this video is about. It's just going off of what we typically see as good. Now, not everyone agrees on what is right, but again, this video is not that debate, just to keep it simple. Going forward, we will ignore these. This leaves us with just good. And the reason why I've singled it out is that as I've played Dungeons & Dragons, I kind of noticed a lot of new players struggle with making good aligned characters, usually because they feel that they're too one-note or they think it's boring. New players might struggle with trying to play any alignment, but this video would be way too long if I talked about how people typically pick the chaotic good or chaotic neutral just to get away with acting like a complete psychopath. Which leads me to the big question. How do you play/make a good character? This seems to be something a lot of players tend to struggle with. Now, I'm not here to debate what's good or evil like a C-tier supervillain. I just want to give a few suggestions to help people along with making and playing good aligned characters. To start, the first roadblock that I've seen players run into when they're trying to make good characters is that there's an assumption that good means simple and restrictive. So let's solve the simple problem. Some might find themselves thinking that good means their character can only act in specific ways, and thus trying to be good is rather simple, just never be bad in a sense. While understandable, this isn't entirely accurate, because having good morals doesn't mean your character is naive or unable to see nuance. For example, let's say your character believes there is good in everyone, and thus likes to spare people when possible. And to preface, this isn't a trait that all good aligned characters will share. And let's also say the villain pleads for their life right before the final blow is made. This doesn't mean the good character is going to believe them immediately, or even let them live. The nuance here is what good remains in the villain that trumps all the evil they have or could continue to do. Just because they think there is good in everyone doesn't mean that they will believe every word someone tells them, or that they won't take the greater good into account. That nuance around how they view what good is and the moral question that they are experiencing through the game can be the thing that makes them interesting as a character and within the party. Another good example of this I found in a blog post titled "Good Isn't Stupid, Weak, or Nice" by Rick Stump, which has a great insight on making varied good aligned characters, and I highly recommend you give it a read. In it, Stump relates the example of Captain Carrot from the Terry Pratchett books as being an example of a good character with depth. He goes on to show how Carrot, while being good and simple, is still able to do interesting and varied things within this good alignment, such as intimidating a receptionist by implying that they don't need an appointment because they are holding a Morningstar. The following is a dramatic reading brought to you by the wonderful staff of AERØH.
Have you got an appointment?
He said.
I don't know,
said Carrot.
Have we got an appointment? I've got an iron ball with spikes on.
Nobby volunteered.
That's a Morningstar, Nobby.
Is it?
Yes,
said Carrot.
An appointment is an engagement to see someone, while a Morningstar is a large lump of metal used for viciously crushing skulls. It is important not to confuse the two, isn't it, Mr.
He raised his eyebrows.
It's Buffo, sir. But
so, if you could perhaps run along and tell Dr. Whiteface we're here with an iron ball with what am I saying? I mean, without an appointment to see him, please and thank you.
In this, something typically seen as not good, intimidating someone with the threat of violence, can be used by someone who is good and not have it betray their alignment, because they are still doing the intimidation in a polite way. A second but different tactic is to embrace that naivety. And what I mean by that is that your character may know and even acknowledge that their morals are naive. But that's the point, right? Your character still tries to follow those morals even if it hurts them, because they want to strive for that goodness, and making exceptions for that would be hypocritical. And this allows for the story moments or arcs where that character's naivety is slowly eroded. And what they choose to do with that as the game moves forward is what makes it interesting. So overall, being good can actually be pretty complex when it comes to characters, so long as you put in the effort to figure out why your character is good and how they view goodness in the world. However, there is a second issue I see with creating good aligned characters, which is that being good can feel rather restrictive on the part of the player. And yeah, it is restrictive. Any alignment comes with restrictions, but good tends to have much more. And ultimately, it should. I asked a few people about this, and one particular answer stuck with me.
From my own viewpoint, people tend to struggle with staying good. It's easy to say that you're a good person and thus you're a good character, but you may get confronted with the lesser of two evils options that don't necessarily pose a good option to you. And choosing to do nothing is one of the most evil choices of all. Being good requires constant effort and no mistakes to remain good. Being evil is easy.
And that's just it. Being good is difficult, especially when, despite all the good you do, bad things still happen to you or those around you. Now, to clarify, when it comes to the party as a whole, you should always go with what everyone as a party wants, even if your character may not like it. You might have to make a few compromises, but you can still make an interesting character conflict in the party with that. But moving back to the quote, nuance in the character comes from that restriction, and even if they know it's the right thing to do, doesn't mean that making that decision won't weigh on them mentally or physically. There's also the idea of choosing the lesser of two evils. Depending on the situation, some good characters will take the lesser evil. It may be the lesser of two evils, but it's still evil. Even if that's the best choice with what they've been given, it's still going to hurt them to make that decision. However, there's another way to take it. You could say that a good character might react to this situation by refusing to make either choice, and try to make a new solution that works best for everyone, unlikely as it may be. Even if that third option they create works, it'll most likely be a path of extreme difficulty, and the stress that builds from that can weigh on them and make them feel like a real person rather than a mythical hero. But if it doesn't work, that opens up a slew of opportunities for your character, even so far as them losing their good alignment. But since this video is about good alignment, I'll focus on the option of staying good. Now, that may not seem particularly interesting at first glance, but what makes it nuanced is how your character reacts to that failure. Trying your best and it not being good enough is a feeling we can all relate to. It's demoralizing and creates an intense feeling of wanting to give up. But acknowledging the consequences of their actions and persisting despite that is what can make a good character so compelling. Now, don't get me wrong, there are perks to being good. People will like and help you if you do good things. They aren't obligated to, and you shouldn't expect them to be, but there's a good chance that they will. Going further into the whole restrictive point, some players think that good is much more restrictive than it actually is. Good does not equal kind. If someone is rude, that doesn't make them evil. A good character can still be pessimistic and hot-tempered, but that doesn't mean that they would let a town of innocent people get ransacked. Furthermore, being good doesn't mean you have to be the straight man character. As I've seen before, a party can kind of form to where everyone else is being chaotic by acting like a bunch of psychopaths, and then there's that one person who ends up having to reel them all in. Sometimes everyone is insane, but that's a whole other thing. To get back on track, a good person can still be lighthearted and jovial. Morals affect a character's personality, but there's much more to someone than just that. They have likes and dislikes and hobbies that make them who they are, so get creative with their personality. Another thing I wanted to touch on is flaws. And I know that kinda contradicts what I just said, but hear me out. Not all of your flaws have to come from your alignment, but you can use it as a point of reference when thinking of a personality. At face value, it can seem difficult to think of flaws in a good character because it feels contradictory. However, if taken to an extreme, many traits of a good character can turn into flaws. Let's take selflessness and see what we can get from that. One way to go about it is that your character cares so much about others that they don't give themselves the same treatment, which, when taken to the extreme, is self-destruction. You can make an entire character arc off that one flaw alone. Maybe they blame themselves for events that happen out of their control. Perhaps they don't want to be a burden on others, so they hide their wounds and/or feelings. And you can go deeper in fleshing out where that self-destruction comes from. Maybe they have a fear of losing people close to them, or they have some deep-rooted hatred for themselves. And again, flaws don't have to be from your alignment. And lastly, I'd like to talk about character motivations. There are tons and tons of options to think of for motivations. It could be to earn a living. Maybe they want to be just like the heroes in the stories. Perhaps someone close to them told them to. Or even a traumatic event happened that spurred them into action. Personally, I find myself coming back to a certain motivation whenever I make a good character. It's not as personal or dramatic as other motivations, but that's what I like about it. It's that there weren't any horrible events, and no one told them to do it either. They go out there and risk their life for the greater good for only one reason. And that's the only reason they need. And that reason is simply because it's the right thing to do. And don't think I didn't see you take my soyjack bit, Bill. I know you made the entirety of our video catalog by the time I made this video, but come on, bro. What's your deal?